Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Pat Shannon is a man on a mission. When he found out that his cancer was stage 4, he decided to visit the last 16 states he hadn't seen. He bought a BMW motorcycle and set out on an 11,000-mile trip, starting in South Dakota to the Oregon and Washington coast, all the way across the country to New England and back. This is his story. Pat, welcome. I am so happy to welcome Pat Shannon to Bump in the Road today. Pat, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Pat, on Bumping the Road.
Tell us a little bit about your mission and travels.
So I am now 60 years old. I still have stage 4 cancer. My cancer is adenoid cystic carcinoma, and I have had that since 2007 was my diagnosis date. Probably had it a couple years before that. Um, but I had been in the food business for quite a few years, and I had a career that spanned about 40 years in food service sales, and that type of thing. And in 2007, I got that little lump in next to right under my jaw, and they told me it was a plugged salivary gland, and so you know, they didn't prescribe anything for it. It was a lump that never went away, didn't hurt, and so I didn't really bother with it. And then the lump started to get bigger. And when it got bigger, I went to see a specialist at Mayo Clinic, and they immediately said it's got to come out of there. And sure enough, it was cancer, and that was February of 2007. So they did the initial surgery. They cut me from ear to ear and cleaned out my salivary glands on the one side, and so that's kind of started my cancer journey. I had radiation after that. And then I was no evidence of disease until 2013. And at that time, I had some spots starting to develop in the lungs and then in my lymph nodes under my arms. And they suspected a spot on my spine and one on my shoulder, although those never developed. And so that began my stage 4 journey. And in 2016, I had half of my right lung removed. And after that surgery, I was forced into retirement. I could not go any further um, with dealing with the work pressure, the cancer, and all that. So that things started to change. And in November 1st of 2018, they diagnosed me with spots on my liver. And so when I went home, I told my wife, I said, there's 16 states that I have not been to, and I'd really like to start fulfilling that dream of completing the journey of seeing those states. And so she said, great, you just bought a brand new pickup, take off. And I said, no, I'd rather do it on a motorcycle. And so I bought a BMW motorcycle, and I came up with the theme of riding on with rare cancer, and created my logo, created some brochures, put signs on and messages on the bike, and that started the mission: one man, one bike, one mission. And it was just to spread some awareness about rare cancer. And I really didn't care if I had one follower or 10,000 followers. It just didn't matter to me. I was going to do the trip. Um, I never made the trip about money. I didn't really ask for donations, although there is on my website, there's a place to donate. And people did. They were very generous. And so last year, I got on the back of the bike and I did an 11,000-mile trip around the country and I saw all the states that I needed to see, fulfilled every one. I was gone 60 days, and like I said, 11,000 miles.
Where did you start?
I started, my home is in Rapid City, South Dakota. So I left there April 28th, 2019. It was 42 degrees and it was windy. And I had to go across Wyoming that first day. Um, and it was brutal. It left me feeling like, wow, what am I doing out here on a motorcycle um, in 40-degree weather with 30-mile-an-hour wind? It really threw a challenge in front of me. So I crossed Wyoming. The second day of the trip, I was in temperatures as low as 19 degrees. Uh, it didn't snow that second day, but it was sure cold. And as I
Did
made
it
my
make you
way,
rethink your plans at all?
it did. It really made me think, "What am I doing out here?" But I was gonna do this trip whether I, traveled 50 miles a day or 500. It really didn't matter. I was on a mission to do it, and, the 3rd day, it did snow on me, and, when it did snow, it pulled me into a place called Craters of the Moon National Park. It's in Idaho. And it was one of those spring snow squalls that come and go. It was about 32 degrees. It wasn't sticking on the road, thank goodness. Um, but I was drawn to a place, and so I went to the visitor center, and there was nobody in there. Of course, it's snowing. It's springtime. The lady that was running the place wanted to know about my trip and what I was doing out in the snowstorm um,
On a
on
motorcycle.
on a motorcycle in the middle of nowhere. And so I told her that, I was just on a mission to raise some more awareness about rare cancer. And she told me some horrifying cancer stories of her own. Two daughters that had had cancer, one had died, and a grandson that had a rare cancer. And so um, that began something, and this was like I say, the 3rd day, and I said a prayer with her, right there in the visitor center, and when we got done, she said goodbye and good luck and all that, and when I went back outside, I looked up and the clouds started to break, and the sun started peeking through. It still was pretty cold, but um, it was like I was free to travel again. So something drew me in there. And from that point on, I knew that the trip was less about me and more about connecting with other people. Um, and so from there, I made my way to Seattle, um, spent the night with a sister, and then back down through Oregon. And then when I finished Oregon, I went all the way back across the United States to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Oh my goodness. What were some of your favorite places? I've been browsing the pictures on your website, and some of them bring back enormous memories for me too. I mean, I've traveled some parts of these roadways. What are some of your favorites?
My my favorites were Crater Lake National Park. Was just beautiful the day I was there. It was absolutely a crystal clear blue sky, and the lake was beautiful. And there still had lots of snow on the ground around there, and it was just gorgeous. That whole area in Oregon, I'd really like to go back to and see that again. That one was awesome. Each state that I went through, it didn't matter if it was going across the loneliest highway in the country, which is in Nevada,
Mhm.
everything had its own beauty. And even this week, as I'm traveling out here, I'm in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Um, I went through Iowa this week. Is beautiful country, rolling hills of cornfields, and you could find beauty anywhere that you want to. I truly believe that.
I agree with you. As a matter of fact, when I took off on Cancer Road trip, a friend of mine said, "There's beauty everywhere," and I took that with me because it was at a time in my life where everything was up in the air and uncertain. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what would happen, but those words stuck with me, and I think part of it is in the eye of the beholder, but it's hard not to see the amazing beauty of this country, particularly when you're driving on the back roads.
Absolutely. And I did 11,000 miles last year in one trip. Less than 1,000 miles was on interstate highway. And so it was all back roads. That's where you meet the best people in the little roadside cafes that, perhaps you just normally drive by. Those are the places I would look for and search out. And I just met the most amazing people in all those places.
I did a cross country trip in 95, and this is pre-internet days, basically. So I never knew what I was going to get into. And that element of surprise, I think, is part of the fun of a road trip.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I, one of the things I did is I had kind of a route picked out, but not. I didn't stick to a plan. I didn't plan anything. I didn't make any reservations anywhere. When I got up in the morning, I looked on my electronic gear and it's like, okay, where do we kind of want to go today, and how do we get there? And I would leave that morning not knowing how far I would get, where I was going to stay, uh, anything. And that I still do that now. I don't know where I'm going to stay tonight. I I just find that element of surprise wonderful. And I'll tell you a quick little story. I was crossing Colorado, and I just bought some new tires in Colorado Springs, and it was really windy. And I was having a hard time with the bike. My shoulder was really hurting bad. And I picked a spot out on the map in the afternoon. I thought, you know what? I'm going to get to this little spot. And when I went online, I was having trouble getting online. I could tell there was two motels in this town, or three, in this little town where I was headed to. It was down in the southeastern corner of Colorado. I can't remember the name of it, but uh, when I got there, one motel was closed. One was a pretty seedy looking place where I said, I can't stay there. And the other was full. And so it was 7:30 at night. And the lady at the motel that was full, she said, go down the road to a place called Coolidge, Kansas. And there's a bed and breakfast there. And so I called this bed and breakfast before I left this little town, and it wasn't too far, it was about 20 miles. And she said, yeah, I got a space for you. So I went over. Coolidge, Kansas is a town of 95 people. This was the best bed and breakfast stay of my entire trip. The room was nothing fancy. Uh, it was actually an old bar that they had moved from another community to this little town and set it up as a bed and breakfast. And the lady that ran it had great stories, served me a breakfast that rivaled any five-star hotel I'd ever been to in my life. It was just wonderful, all for $80. And though it was just such a surprise, I just those types of stories, you just can't make them up hardly. You have to go out and live them.
You do, and you have to be open to whatever happens on the road, don't you?
You do, and it's elements like I talked about before with the weather. Uh, cold. I got snowed on twice. I had numerous days where it rained. I found out that I would rather ride my motorcycle in the rain rather than in the wind. Um, and so, as long as you're prepared for those elements, and I have some really good gear. Um, so, as long as you're prepared for those elements, it it makes a trip that much more beautiful. It really does.
So once you got out to Myrtle Beach, where did you go from there?
I headed up the East Coast. I went inland just a little bit since it was Memorial Day weekend. It was very hard to find hotels on the coast. So I went to a place called Edenton, North Carolina. Beautiful little town, historic, very historic, lots of historical homes there. I just couldn't take enough pictures. Um, no Walmarts in this little town, and it was just full of history. And I found a bed and breakfast there that was a converted tobacco barn, and that was an interesting experience. Very nice place. So I stayed a couple nights there, and worked my way up the East Coast. Went to Annapolis, Maryland, um, and one of the other things about my trip was with rare cancer. The rare cancer that I have, there's only 12 to 1,500 new cases every year. So I did not know. I had never met another person with my type of cancer face to face. And so the first one was in Bend, Oregon. And then the next one in Annapolis, Maryland, I met three people there with the same type of cancer. And we all have the same but different stories. Um, and it's interesting to meet people that are going through the same things you're going through. And that's the thing about rare cancer that a lot of times people don't understand is that, especially in rural areas, you need to travel great distances to get treatment. So for me, I live in Rapid City, South Dakota. I get treated at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. That's 600 miles away. Um, so finding people, uh, that have the same kind of cancer as you, when it's that rare, that was really a gift to meet some of those people out on the road, and that was one of the missions of the trip too.
I think everybody going through anything difficult, but particularly cancer, I think we all look to connect with others, and it is hard. My type of lymphoma is very rare, and I've run into some people by volunteering um, to be a mentor through some of the volunteer groups. There's one that's just lymphoma oriented, and there's one out of Chicago. I'm just not coming up with the name at the moment. But I think that connection is just invaluable.
It is. It really is. Um, when I first when I was first diagnosed with a salivary gland cancer, I didn't even pay attention to what type it was. Cancer was cancer. Hey, get rid of it. I got work to do. It wasn't until I was had metastasized 6 years later when the doctor said your adenoid cystic carcinoma is back. And I said, "What did you call it?" And he said, "Adenoid cystic carcinoma." And so then I had to really start Googling and researching what adenoid cystic carcinoma was, and then found a couple of online support groups of people that had this. And people, it's it can be a tragic story. Cancer can be a tragic story, or you can use it to your advantage, and
How do you
it will
I
kick you
agree
off
with
your
you.
butt. It'll kick you off your butt to get living, and because we don't know how much time we have. So that's what it did for me anyway, and that's what this trip is all about. It's about going out and making a life for yourself, um, playing the hand that you're dealt. So I
You
still
have a
have
quote on
cancer.
no, you have a quote on your, bike, "The best of my life will be the rest of my life."
Yes, correct. Yeah,
I
kind of.
love that.
Yeah, and I've got T-shirts with that one too. And the other one of the other quotes on the back of my bike that gets a lot of attention is it says, I'll probably die from cancer, but it ain't going to kill me." And that's kind of what the doctors have said. If I don't get run over by a beer truck, I will probably die from this cancer eventually. So,
Well, avoid the beer truck. I think that's kind of a noble way to go.
right.
But let's continue up the coast after, the Carolinas and Virginia, on your trip, because this was just an amazing trip that you took.
Eh, Yeah, I tried to avoid the larger cities if I could. Um, but I have a son and a daughter-in-law that live in Boston, And so my wife was actually going to fly out and meet me in Boston. So I had to drive the bike into Boston, and I did, and it worked out fine, you know. But there's those elements of fear that I'd never been in a big city with a motorcycle ever. There's no big cities where I live, so and everybody honks at you there, you know. So I just got used to it, but and did fine. And we had a great visit in Boston with my son and daughter-in-law, and then my wife had flown out for 4 days. So I kind of took a break there in Boston for 3 4 days, just decompressed a little bit, and then got back on the road. So and then did all the northeastern states are beautiful. Vermont, New Hampshire. Love to go back there and ride again. So
That's pretty countryside up there, isn't it?
it is, it is. And,
Did you
the
get to
other thing,
Maine?
I did get to Maine. It was raining the day that I was in Maine, so I stopped at the, um, at a museum. I believe it was called Bath, Maine, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken,
Mhm.
and there's a maritime museum there that was just wonderful. And so days that you couldn't ride in the rain, you try to find something else to do in the area, and,
You can always eat lobster in Maine.
I did, yeah, and I had to have one of those sandwiches, whatever they call them.
Lobster
It's
roll. A lobster
a
roll. They're great,
lobs
aren't they?
lobster roll, yeah, that's
What was
right.
some of your favorite food of all the places you went?
I would have to say it was probably the seafood. Um, I really enjoyed the seafood, and where I come from in South Dakota, we just can't get fresh seafood, so, um, you know, I would order the clams, I would order the mussels, I would order the oysters, you know, kind of thing. Um, my
That's out after my own heart. I'm an oyster fiend, and
yeah,
whenever I go anywhere that where they have good oysters, I just go on a quest.
right, right. Yeah, I love, good seafood, and, I just like I say, I can't get it in South Dakota, I can't get real good seafood there, so, that was a treat for me. But I did have I set my budget. I had a budget of $150 a day, and that had to cover my lodging, my fuel, and my food. So I couldn't go overboard. So a lot of times, if I knew that I wanted to check out a specific restaurant in an area, I would have the continental breakfast at the hotel, skip lunch, and then splurge at dinner. So sometimes I had to get creative with that.
What do you think are some of the lessons of travel?
Um, the best lessons that I think I ran across was the goodness of people. The There are so many wonderful people in the world. I didn't run into anybody that had one negative thing really to say to me anyway. Um, there were just so many good people out there, and it changed me as a person. I do believe because it doesn't matter uh, what color they are, what political group they're affiliated with, or whatever. Everybody had a cancer story. Literally, everybody that I talked to had a cancer story in their life, whether it was them that had it or a close friend or close relative. Everybody had a cancer story. Um, and that was a big lesson for me too. So, but the goodness of people, I think, was the bigger lesson. We hear so much negative in the world about people, but really, I think there are more good people than bad people, for sure.
If you could rewrite your story, would you?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Um, I think you look back on your life, you know, and I'm 60 years old now, so I look back on my life and think, what would have I have changed? The only thing I might have changed is I might have chose a different career path uh, that was not more rewarding financially. I was very well taken care of, but um, something that really interests me is cars and motorcycles and that kind of thing. And I probably have one regret. It's not uh, going to work for something that I truly loved. And that'd be the only regret that I would have. Nothing else.
What what advice would you pass on to somebody facing a rare cancer?
Not to give up for sure. I think a lot of people when they get that first diagnosis, um, it's it's a shock for sure, and every diagnosis still it can be a shock, but you have to keep pushing uh, and living your dreams, whatever your dreams are. Wake up in the morning and go do it because now is the time, uh, to do it. Don't wait for the cancer diagnosis. But if you do get it, don't consider yourself done. Don't ever consider yourself done. Um, uh, I believe that your a, a positive mental attitude is what's going to get you through, um, and it certainly has worked for me.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life. Bump in the Road is a production of Cancer Road Trip. Subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media at Cancer Road Trip, and you can learn more at www.cancerroadtrip.com. Until next time, be safe and be well.